Two men on a mic, Jim Ryan and Mark Rizzo. And what is this? We're up to episode 20. Can you believe we've done 20 of these things, Mark?
We almost have as many people viewing these as many as we've done.
Well, today we're graced with a guy you've known for a long time, so I'm going to let you do the introductions. But I love the fact that he's got a Met hat on, being you and I are both diehard Met fans. So go ahead. Let's do this.
Well, besides being a diehard Met fan, I got the opportunity to meet Dave Jurman, our guest this week during my time at Arista Records. Dave was responsible for having one of the best ears in the building and was responsible for finding and signing Expose and definitely having a hands-on as far as Taylor Dayne is concerned. But Dave, after being at Arista, went on to even an equally successful career over at Columbia Records. And we can get into that because I don't know when you left and when I was still there, or I left and then you went over. But if you want to just start with, how does somebody find talent? Because we're all always getting cassettes back in the day, or always somebody knows somebody who's going to sing. Start with how you find Expose.
Right. Well, first off, Mark and Jim, thank you so much for having me. Big fan of the podcast since the first episode, and it's a real honor to be here. So thank you so much.
Sure.
So,
our pleasure.
In terms of Expose and finding artists, in those days, there were a lot of artists who were putting out records on independent labels, particularly in the dance field, 12-inch records. And Expose was a perfect example of that. They were on a label called Pantera Records out of Miami, Florida, put out a song called Point of No Return on that label under the name Exposed. And it came out in late 1984. And as I was mentioning before, a lot of these artists were starting out with 12-inch singles on independent labels. And I happened to be down in Florida on a trip at that time promoting an artist named Jermaine Stewart. And you might know Jermaine Stewart from his big hit, We Don't Have to Take Our Clothes Off
to have a good
But
time.
The record that really introduced him to U.S. audiences was a song called The Word Is Out. That was his debut single in 1984, peaked at 41 on the Billboard Hot 100, but got his name out there. But a huge top 5 record in South Florida at the time. I-95 was a station that was very instrumental in breaking that record. So I was down there promoting Jermaine's The Word Is Out, gigantic club record at the time. And while I'm down there visiting various clubs and DJs and so forth, and I go to this one club called Cats, in the Miami area, and the DJ saying, "Hey, I just worked on this record. I just did some mix work on it. It's called Point of No Return by Exposed." And I said, "Oh, that's interesting. Hey, I'll have to check this out or whatever." And then I'm starting to hear it on the radio down there. And listening to that record, I said, wow, this record's got not only just, it was a big club record and a local Miami hit, but I said, this record might have potential to be a national hit. I think this record is something that could perhaps fly. There were so many records that were coming out that were just club hits at the time, but this was a record that I thought potentially had national success. Long story short, brought the record to the attention of Don Einer and said, hey, listen, I think we have a potential record here that we could maybe cross over here, and maybe let's offer him a 12-inch deal and see what can happen with this record, and it won't certainly cost us much. And he agreed with me, went to Clive Davis. He spoke to him about it, gave the green light. One thing led to another, and we had the group signed for just a 12-inch deal. That was all. So the downside was minimal. It was a $25,000 deal. If the record didn't happen, it wasn't like we spent, hundreds of thousands of dollars on an album and videos and so forth. And fortunately, the record did have success and kind of led to what eventually happened with the group.
Wow. Interesting story. Who got them to change the name from Exposed to Expose?
I did. So we felt that Exposed was a name that was a little on the risque side. And also, if we were going to take this group national and try and bring them to top 40 radio, we had to come up with a different name. So Louis Martinet, the producer, Frank Diaz, the manager, and I were all talking about different names, and came up with, hey, what about Expose? Which led ultimately to then naming their first album Exposure.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting. We signed them unlike typical A&R where you perhaps go and see a showcase and you see the band and they come up and meet the label and you sign for an album deal, with 12-inch deals, it was more just picking up a record and hoping you had something there. I had no idea what they looked like. I'd never met them, nothing. But on a future trip to Florida, when I went down there to finally see them perform, I saw, wow, this group's got a terrific performance. And I heard other tracks they did. I was very, very impressed. And that got me really, really excited and got the label excited. Eventually, we were able to do an album. The rest was history.
Do you still stay in touch with any of the
I certainly do.
Okay.
I certainly do, primarily through social media. One very gratifying thing about Expose and a lot of artists in that era is they are still very much active. They're part of a musical movement called freestyle, which was very, very big in the 1980s. And that genre featured groups like Expose. Taylor Dayne came out of that movement. The Cover Girls, so many from the 1980s, were part of what was called this Lisa and Cult Jam, Noel, and that music got so big, it actually spawned the Billboard crossover chart, which came out in 1986. There were so many of those artists who were breaking, primarily out of Miami and New York. And I'm very pleased that to this day, Expose are together and they do performances. And not only do they do performances, they do arenas. There's these freestyle packages with maybe 10, 15 artists. I mean, they're playing 15, 20,000 seaters. It's amazing. It's almost like the dance equivalent of classic rock. And the fact that these fans still love this music, still see these artists perform, and they're still very, very active. And for me, that's extremely gratifying that they weren't just a one-off kind of thing. They're actually still out there making music and be able to have an audience, which is quite incredible.
I know there was a lot of excitement and buzz about them. I think they did this past year or the year before, they did the 80s cruise that the MTV VJs, when I worked with them at Sirius XM on 80s on 8, would go to and be host for. And we, a couple of years, we collected content for. But I believe Expose was one on one of the recent ones. And talking to Mark Goodman and Alan Hunter, who were both earlier guests of the podcast, they said that people went nuts for them on the cruise. So it's definitely cool to see. It's Dave Jurman here with Mark and Jim. It's two guys on a mic. Please like, subscribe, and comment. We get comments from Dave, so we'd love comments from you on this podcast. And I know Mark's still working on some big prize for once we get the 1,000th subscriber, but we got ways to go yet.
1,000. I was up to 1 million. But I did want to ask you, Dave, so after you found Expose and that whole thing, did you have others that you brought in that were not as successful? Or did you get like, hey, this is pretty cool, I found somebody good, I'm going to keep out there? Or what happened?
Well, it certainly opened doors for me in terms of finding other artists and so forth. But Expose kind of took 2 years out of my life.
Wow.
The first single came out in 1985. And being just a 12-inch release at the time, it was pretty much just a priority for myself. It wasn't something that all the departments were working, because it was only at that point in time just a dance record. But then once the project got to the success of Point of No Return, a follow-up came out called Exposed to Love. That did extremely well. I mean, both these records sold over 100,000 12-inches, which is, staggering for a group to sell that many 12-inch records without an album out. And then based on the success of those two singles, it led to the album. And the label couldn't have been more supportive. Every department got so much behind it. The record ended up going double platinum. But I think the thing that's pretty special about Expose is they're in the music history books. I'm someone, we could talk about this further. I just love music history, pop music history, charts, all of that kind of stuff from being a little kid. And one, especially with Expose, is they became the first group in the history of recorded music to have 4 top 10 hits off of a debut album. If you ask that trivia question, most people are going to say, the Beatles, right? The Rolling Stones, certainly,
Michael Jackson, Madonna.
Right, exactly. Right. They were the first. Might have been a solo artist who'd done it, but no group had ever done it. To have 4 top 10 hits off of a debut album, and they are that. They're in the record books. Matter of fact, it's even chronicled. Billboard has a book called the Billboard Book of Hot 100 Hits. It's a wonderful book. I recommend anyone picking up this book because it has a page devoted to every single number one record that went on the Billboard charts with the history behind it, and it mentions that there. So it's actually, cataloged in music history.
So take us back.
Wait, Jim, I just want to add, when I was at Arista, I remember we worked Seasons Change, and I got it to number 2 on the EC chart. I could not go number 1 because of Patrick Swayze, She's Like the Wind, and I could knock that out. But we had Seasons Change, and obviously we had a bunch of others, but that was a great ballad.
And I played both of those as currents.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a special record. One, because it went to number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100. And if you ask for personal thrills, when that went to number 1, someone who just loved charts and followed the Hot 100 to be involved with a single that went to number 1 on the Hot 100. I never forget the night Rick Basiglia came into my office and said, just want you to know, I just got the phone with Billboard and Seasons Change is going number 1. And the feeling was just indescribable. But I do remember being very thrilled by what you did, Mark. And I remember coming over to you and say, hey, does this have a chance to go top 10? And you said top 10, and it's going to go even higher or whatever.
It's a beautiful
and the
song.
fact that you did what you did with it was fantastic. And it rounded out the group too. Yes, they were a freestyle dance group, but it also showed that they could do other genres as well too. And to this day, you walk through the mall and you hear Seasons Change on the speaker system. It's quite gratifying.
So Dave, what was your first job in the music biz?
So I started at Arista Records in 1979. I just come out of college, and I was hired. Basically, it was a kind of a quasi internship. I was a field marketing representative for Arista Records in 1979. The label was just a little over 4 years old, and the job was basically going to record stores, bringing promotional copies, putting up displays, and so forth. I'll never forget my first day. I was given a bunch of posters and driven over to Disco Mat Records on 57th Street near Lexington Avenue. And I was told, here, put up these displays. I had no idea who Phyllis Hyman was. I had no idea who the GRP All-Stars were. Angela Bo, who are these people? I grew up as a rock guy,
Yeah.
But I was just thrilled to be in the record business, involved with Arista Records. And lo and behold, Angela Bofield and Phyllis Hyman, who I had no idea who they were, are now two of my all-time favorite female vocalists. So I started that in 79, and then fortunately that turned into a full-time marketing manager position. Arista had these people in the sales department whose job was to work in conjunction with the radio promotion people to market the records, get store reports, all of those kind of things. And I became we had 2 marketing managers in New York, and I was one of those people in 1979. That kind of propelled my career there, working as a marketing manager in the sales department.
How'd you hear about the job, though?
So I have, sadly, he passed away, a wonderful, wonderful person. I was in college radio, and I was getting ready to, finish my semester and then go into the workplace. And I spoke to Jim Del Bazzo, if you know Jim Del Bazzo.
Sure, I know him over at Columbia, yeah.
Right, Rocky is his nickname. And he had this position before I did, and he became the head of college promotion. And he said, hey, I heard Arista has something there. And I knew Marilyn Lipsius, who was the head of college promotion there, and was called in for an interview and got it. So I'm always eternally grateful to Jim, wonderful, wonderful guy who worked at MTV as well as Columbia Records, for telling me about that opportunity. And that's how I found out about it.
Nice.
Interesting. And where were you doing college radio?
So I always like to tell people kind of my music business actually started when I was in college. So I worked at WXYC Radio. I was part of the original staff. That is the campus radio station of my alma mater, the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill.
Okay.
And that was an incredible experience because I was not necessarily interested in going into radio as much as I love radio. What I was doing there was working in the music department. So I was reviewing records, telling them about specific cuts to play on albums, all that kind of stuff. And I produced a show called Artist Profile. And I had the good fortune at 18 years old to interview Billy Joel, Dennis Wilson, Ozzy Osbourne, Southside
Wow.
Johnny, Ronnie
Wow.
Montrose, Ted Nugent, Bill Payne during my college years of Little Feat, all these different people. And I produced these radio specials on them that were aired on the campus radio station. And that kind of gave me the bug for the music business. And I found out working in the at this campus station that, hey, there are people who work at record companies who come in and give records out and try to get records played. Wow, that could be really a cool thing. I'd love to do that. And that kind of gave me the bug for, okay, I'd like to maybe see if I could work in the record business while I was in college. I think I
Well, I
spent
think
as
it's
much time
amazing.
at the campus radio station as in my studies, but without that experience, it wouldn't have led to meeting Jim Del Bazzo and then working, at Arista Records. So I'm eternally grateful for that experience at WXYC and just had a ball there interviewing all these different artists.
I was going to say, I mean,
Billy was
that's something amazing to be an 18-year-old at a college radio
Billy
station
Joel,
and able to
wow.
get to interview all these huge stars who at the
Yeah,
time
it
weren't,
became-
they became bigger than they were probably then, but still, that's still pretty cool.
Yeah. I became kind of the guy at the station to interview. So if artists were in town coming to play in Chapel Hill, they'd come up to the station. College radio, it's still big, but in those days, it was very important, extremely important. All the labels had college reps. College radio played a very, very important role. It's kind of like a stepping stone for artists before they got onto FM rock radio.
Right.
So I would do either the phoners or if artists came up, Butch Trucks, the Allman Brothers Band. Remember interviewing him, Tim Curry, who was a solo artist on A&M Records after the success of Rocky Horror Picture Show. Artists like that I would also interview either in studio, Delbert McClinton, in studio, or do phoners with them as well. And it was just a wonderful experience that kind of gave me the bug for the record business.
Very cool. Were you instrumental? We talked about Expose. Were you the one who told Leslie Wonderman, you got to change the name? It's not going to work?
Well, that was one of the people that I was one of the people who had that conversation with Rick Wake, her producer. She actually had a couple 12 inches out under the name of Les Lee on Megabolt Records, a small independent label, before she then signed with Arista Records. So she had that name.
Okay.
And we first talked about, well, what about Leslie Taylor? And then, it was kind of like a group kind of conversation. Then it kind of turned into Taylor Dayne from there.
That's a
But
great
yeah, there
name.
was never any thought that was going to be called Leslie Wonderman.
Great name.
Nothing against that name, but we felt we certainly need a more
No, of
marketable
course
name.
not. Of course not.
And that was a similar situation to Expose. Again, just a 12-inch deal. Matter of fact, no one knew her, no one met her. It was just, let's put this record out, see what we've got. And
She's still
the
working
record-
today.
and
Sure,
another artist,
she's
she's still
everywhere.
working today, doing extremely well. She's done television and everything. But
She
it all
looks a little
started
bit
with-
different, though. She looks a little bit different.
Well,
Yeah,
we
but
all
she still
do.
looks great. But
And she's
she still
talented. She's
looks
got a
great.
great voice. I mean, she's played Broadway. She's everywhere.
She still sounds great, which is fantastic, and just delighted that she's able to have a career. But it started as a 12-inch, and then we even did another single before the album came out, which also was a big hit, called Prove Your Love.
Yeah.
And just like Expose, who had the 4 top 10 hits, Taylor also had 4 top 10 hits off of her debut album with Tell It to My Heart, Prove Your Love, then her ballad, which you hear at every wedding now, I'll Always Love You,
Love you.
and
I
then
worked that
wrapping
one.
up with, which you worked, and with gigantic AC hit, and then Don't Rush Me.
Right.
Was
Don't
the
Rush
first
Me,
one
that's
from
right.
that one. So that was very, very exciting to be involved with that project as well.
Mark owes Taylor an apology. We all look different than we did in the 80s. You couldn't shave in the 80s. You had such a young face.
I still
Now-
can't shave.
Now
No,
you
but
shave
I-
once or twice a month.
No, but I'm complimenting that she looks much different than she did when she's glamorized now. She's beautiful. She grew into this blossoming artist. I mean, she was not, she looked like a Long Island girl, and I could say that coming from Long Island. Now she looks like a
Right,
star. I mean, she's
Yeah.
on top of it too, and she's got the pipes,
Yes.
man. As long as you have your voice, you don't lose anything.
Mhm.
We're here with Dave Jurman. It's two guys and a mic. Please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Subscriptions are free, and we appreciate that. It helps us grow the show. All right, you sent me this, Dave, and I got to ask about the Iggy Pop story, because it sounds like it is a pretty interesting deal. So tell us the Iggy Pop story.
So as I mentioned before, I became a full-time marketing manager late in '79, and now it's early 1980, and Iggy Pop put out 3 albums on Arista, '79 to '81. This was his second album, his second tour, called Soldier. And he was playing a club still in existence called Irving Plaza. And although the record didn't really do well, there was a little bit of a buzz in New York. And there was a store called Soho Music Gallery, and a woman who worked there who was into the Iggy Pop project big time. She put gigantic displays in the store, which no other store would do, because that album wasn't certainly a huge seller, but she was just gigantically supportive. And I said, come to the Iggy Pop show, and then we'll go backstage and, say hello to him afterwards or whatever. So we go to the show, we go backstage, and we're there, and there's Iggy and other people around. And I look behind me, and there's David Bowie. And Iggy would always be hanging out with David Bowie at that time. They were, very, very close. Obviously, they worked together creatively. And when you're there and there's someone who's just talking to someone on, and all you want to do is just quickly say hi or hello or something like that. Well, there's Iggy talking to someone, and I interrupted him I said, I just want to introduce you to someone. And he just turned around and screamed in my face and got up, stormed out. And there's David Bowie and everyone. They see the whole thing, just storms out of the room, and I'm there like Ralph Cramden, in the honeymoon. What happened? And he just stormed out of the room, totally upset at me that I, interrupted him, and his whole entourage. And there I am standing, like what am I going to do? And I was very concerned. This is going to get back to the office tomorrow. I'm in deep trouble. Well, there's a little bit more of the story. Fortunately, it didn't get back to anyone in the New York office. Fast forward a year later, now I'm working for Arista Records in Los Angeles as a Los Angeles marketing manager. And Iggy, his last album, he was touring in support of that for Arista Records, and he's playing in San Diego. And I'm down in San Diego. I've got to bring the retailers. We want to meet Iggy. Can we go backstage? Oh, no problem. We'll go backstage and meet Iggy. So I go back, and it's like, this is not going to be good. He's going to remember me. He's going to remember this incident with me interrupting him and him screaming at me and everything like that. And lo and behold, he didn't remember a thing. He couldn't have been nicer. He met the people. It was the most incredible turnaround situation one can imagine. So fortunately, dodged a bullet there, and he was very, very gracious. And then sadly, after that record, he was dropped from the label.
Am I wrong? The closest he came to really having a top 40 hit was Wild One? Iggy Pop?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mid 80s, it was a great record. WLIR played the hell out of that record.
Yeah. He's an artist who somehow always resurfaces. He's been on Arista. He's been on Columbia with the Stooges. He's been on a label distributed by Chrysalis. He's been on A&M. He's been on Virgin. There's always someone out there signing it. But Jim, I believe you're right. I think that was his
closest top 40. I mean, he has a massive following and a lot of albums and a lot of, a cult following. But as far as radio airplay, Wild One, I believe, was the only one that really broke through. To an extent.
And the song that people know him for is Lust for Life, which
That's true.
The movie Trainspotting as well.
Yeah, Lust for Life was a big one, too. I missed that. I forgot about that one.
And he co-wrote China Girl, which Bowie did as well. Yeah. But as far as airplay and exposure, Jim, the one you mentioned, absolutely.
Yeah.
Cool.
Jim, I was just going to jump in and talk about somebody screaming at me, and this might be why I'm a Met fan now, but as a kid, I was at LaGuardia Airport, and Reggie Jackson came off the plane. I was a kid. I don't remember how old I was. And I had gone over to him and asked for his autograph. And in front of everybody says, first let me do this, and then I'll do that. And he puts his bags down. So me being me, I walked away. And he said, no, come back here, kid. But I was like mortified so that's my story about why I was scarred at an early age to not being a Yankee fan. But it's embarrassing when somebody shouts out something like that and you're like, oh yeah, man. And exactly. I mean, I was a kid, but actually involved in being an adult with an artist. But I had an artist
Right.
once I had to take somewhere. I won't say the name, I won't say where we went, but I remember him yelling at me that he was, whatever we were asking him to do, this was going against what he wanted to do. And he said, "It's going to be your ass."
Well, you can name the artist. Just say he allegedly did this.
No, I'm not going to say anything about that. But that being said, also when I was at Capitol, I had a big fight with Everclear.
Oh,
Oh, really?
there was a time where Art Alasakis, I was working in Philadelphia, and he was not the easiest
He
guy
can
to get
sue
along
me.
with.
As far as I can, he can sue me. But he
Yeah.
turned out to be a jerk, and he was yelling at me. And he said to me that he was a millionaire. He said, "I'm a millionaire, and you'll never be a millionaire." It's like, excuse me.
I think he got nicer as the years went on, but there was a time in the 90s when they were really hitting it big that he had an attitude. Because I remember coming up.
And then fast forward, I'm with my kids at Disneyland in California, and we get hooked up for like a VIP experience. So we're sitting in this VIP area, and who's next to me but this guy that says, "I'll never be a millionaire." But because it was on the phone, he didn't know what I looked like. And I was like, "Tell Marianne, I think I'm going to hit this guy. I hate him. I hate him. And don't do it in front of the kids." I was like, I'd spit in his food or just, oh, what an. And then there were other stories that I heard that went on about him. But I do believe Capitol, I think they took some kind of a stand against him about some other stuff that went down. But not a good guy in my book. So if he wants to sue me, bring it on, buddy.
Talking about food, Dave, tell us the story about now. All I ever heard about these weekly luncheons from Mark at Arista was he and Ken Lane playing footsie under the table until Clive would yell. How did you screw up the meal? You were in charge of the meal one week?
Yeah, well, what happens
so the
is
way
every
it worked
department
was
does it.
right. You would the executives who attended it were sent a memo, and each week a different person was responsible for getting the food.
Yeah,
you could get it from wherever you were given at that time $250 to get the food for everyone, which would then be delivered. There was a butler there who would heat the food up in a little kitchen outside the conference room, and then the meal would be served. So it was my first turn to do it. At this point in time, I got promoted to be the National Director of Alternative Radio and Dance Music Promotion. At that time, Alternative Radio was called Modern Music Radio. That was the first term for alternative in the early 80s when that format was birthed. And I was telling a friend of mine that about the whole thing, and that I've got to, order lunch, my first time ever doing it, and I get $250. And she said to me, "Hey, I got an idea here, and I could make some money from this. You could help me out with this. You got $250. How about I'll make the food instead? You can get it from anywhere you want, right? So I'll make the food instead, and I'll bring it. I live in Queens. I'll bring it there, and then we can serve the food. It only cost me $150. So I'm going to make chicken cordon bleu with side dishes and everything. And it's going to cost you $150, and I'll make $100. And I can help her out, a few extra bucks, why not? Help her out. Anyhow, the Friday comes, and now it's like 12:30, and the luncheon starts at 1:00, and she's not there. It's not like I can call her on a cell phone. There's no cell phones at that time. She finally shows up at 1:20, and she's parking her car in a garage across the street from Arista Records, and I guess called me on a phone or something, and finally got a hold of me. So I race across the street to meet her, and here we are with trays of chicken cordon bleu and side dishes, racing across 57th Street to try and get the food there in time. We finally get it in there, and the butler's very upset because he has to heat it up. It's not like he heat up chicken cordon bleu in 5 minutes, So okay, first off, she's late. The meal is going to be late, and this is Clive Davis and all the executives and everything. So the meal is late. The butler's upset. The food finally comes out, and everyone's looking like, who ordered this? This is terrible. This is awful, And of course I had to fess up. And I think they ended up ordering pizza because the food was so bad,
Oh, boy.
So I learned my lesson, and every week after that I was assigned, there was a wonderful restaurant called Romeo Salta, which a lot of Arista people went to. Sometimes we'd have department meetings there and everything, and I played it safe. Everyone loved Romeo Salta.
Right.
So for all my remaining years, I always get Romeo Salta. I learned my lesson.
I used to just check off Romeo Salta, get the Caesar salad and blah, 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 and that was it.
Did Clive
But
let
it
you
was a
order lunch again for
disaster.
everybody?
I'm sorry.
Did Clive ever let you order lunch again for
They
everybody?
did. Yep.
Okay.
I did get a second chance, but
That's
he made
very
sure not
funny.
to screw it up.
That is funny. Let's
So
do
how did
the
you end up going to Columbia? And what year was that? Because I went over in 2000.
Yeah. So I started working at Columbia Records in 1989.
So you went the
And
year before me.
yeah, so 1989, I started working there, and that was a wonderful experience as well, too. Different from Arista from the standpoint that, Arista was a wonderful place to work with and very family-like, and to this
That's what
day
I
it
said.
still is. There's a
Exactly.
Facebook page that I contribute to regularly called "I Worked at Arista Records in the
Yep, I'm on
'80s."
it with you. Yep.
That I continue to, as the music history person that I enjoy, I like to post things about certain things that went on with Arista Records in the charts and things like that. And it was a wonderful place to work with. And particularly, it was a wonderful place to work at in the 1980s. Why? Because that's when Arista Records really became Arista Records. Yes, it had some successes in the 70s with Manilow and Alan Parsons Project and Melissa Manchester, but the 80s is when Arista Records really went into overdrive with the success of Whitney Houston and others. And then, of course, continue that success all the way through its history in the 90s. But the 80s was a real special time. Mark and I, we could literally talk for hours about the specialness of that time. Columbia was a wonderful experience as well, too, but a different situation. Now you're going to an incredibly large label where the distribution, the labels are all housed in Black Rock at that time, the famous Black Rock building. And you're talking about the biggest label in the
Exactly.
recording industry, and a label that it was special for me because someone growing up, I always admired Columbia Records, the history, the roster of it, and so forth. And then the challenge of a label that really wasn't really necessarily known for dance music. They had a few successes, Lisa and so forth or whatever, but to try and raise the profile of that label in dance music. And fortunately, at that label, we were able to have the biggest selling dance album of the decade with CNC Music Factory,
Mhm.
which on Columbia Records sold over 4 million copies and had multiple hits. And the song we hear to this day, "Gonna Make You Sweat." So that was a terrific experience as well, too.
How
Going
did
back
you
to
tell Arista you were going to go? I mean, that had to be a tough call, or your contract was up in the day. I don't remember if you had contracts, or I'm sure Clive was not thrilled.
Well, it was a wonder. It was a situation of Arista Records. I certainly was very happy there, but opportunity for Columbia Records was something also that I thought was very special, and that opportunity presented it to me at some point, and I decided to take that opportunity and take that risk.
So when you were back at Arista and you were in charge of alternative and dance, which are two completely opposite, but you worked quite a bit, I would imagine, with Dennis McNamara and WLIR on Long Island.
Yes, yeah. So at Arista, actually, they were very closely knit, only because the success that we had with alternative artists at that time were also artists who were successful in the dance arena. So A Flock of Seagulls,
Mm-hmm.
Thompson Twins, Ministry were also big in the particularly alternative dance clubs.
Right.
And 1982, 1983 was an incredible year for Arista Records in that genre. I was fortunate to be working these artists at Alternative Radio, LIR, KROQ, KNAC, and so forth, across the K-Quake in San Francisco, this network of alternative rock stations that came to the scene at the time. And we just had just a killer roster of artists. In a span of 1 year, we had A Flock of Seagulls, Iran, Thompson Twins with Lies, and then Hold Me Now. Haircut 100, two monster records, Love Plus One and Favorite Shirts. Heaven 17, Let Me Go. Pete Shelley, Homo Sapien,
Wow.
Ministry, Work for Love, Cube Field, Dancing Heaven, all within about a 12-month period. For in the alternative rock arena, these were monster records. Some crossed over and become big hits, like Hold Me Now.
Yeah.
Went top 5. Iran became a top 10 record. But in answer to your question specifically, yes, LIR was one of the most important stations I dealt with. Dennis was wonderful, and Larry the Duck there, and
Yeah.
they were hugely supportive of all of our artists. And I remember bringing all those artists up there. Al Jorgensen of Ministry, Tom Bailey, the Thompson Twins. All these people, did LIR interviews, and hugely important radio station.
It was, I'll tell you a Flock of Seagulls story, interesting story, and it wasn't that long ago. I was at Disney World in Epcot, and they have this ride called Guardians of the Galaxy, which is based on the movie. And one of the songs that they blast, there's like 5 different ones from the 80s they blast while you're riding the roller coaster, and it's I Ran by Flock of Seagulls is one of the songs. So a little bit later on in the day, my wife and I are over at the American Pavilion, and we go in to watch the show about the history of America and the animatronics. We come walking out, and I hear the song again blasting outside, and I'm like, "That's strange." And it's coming from the theater across and wouldn't you know it, Flock of Seagulls was performing that afternoon. So we sat down and watched it. But you just come off the ride and you hear it, and now you hear them perform. Of course,
Live.
Mike Scored has no hair now, probably
Yes.
from all that stuff he did to his hair back in the 80s. But it was an interesting day to hear it on a ride and then to see them doing it live.
Oh my goodness. He is a Florida resident, by the way.
Yes.
He lives there now. Yeah. He's if you go see them again, another group still around, still performing, he's the only original member
Correct.
who you see now in the band. But there's still a Flock of Seagulls. They do a lot of these 80s package tours and so
Right.
forth. And Mike, as I mentioned, is a Florida resident.
Right.
But they were certainly, that debut album was a real groundbreaker for that whole British alternative rock scene in the early 80s.
Yeah. And then we'll age everybody. The other day I read where Into the Gap, which had Hold Me Now from Thompson Twins, is now 40 years old, that album.
Yes. Yep.
40
They're
years
actually
old.
doing a whole package around the 40th anniversary, I understand, for that album with different outtakes and things like that. And Tom Bailey, the Thompson Twins do not tour anymore, but after many years of being dormant, Tom Bailey of the Thompson Twins now tours doing the Thompson Twins stuff. And he's fantastic. I've seen him twice, and he's just great. He's got an all-girl band backing him up, and does the Thompson Twins material to the best.
I'm not sure if the other two, Joe Leeway and Alana Curry, I think her name was, I don't know if they're still with us or they just retired. Okay.
Matter of fact, they did their first interview together in many years. It's in Classic Pop magazine. It's a British magazine. Joe left the band before their last Arista album.
Yeah.
And he has been living in the Los Angeles area for many, many years. And he's a psychotherapist. He's in the psychology field. And I believe he's specifically a psychotherapist, if not a psychologist, something along those lines. He's been doing that since the 1980s. Alana and Tom eventually got married. They moved to New Zealand, had a family and so forth, but eventually got divorced. She now is back in the UK, and she's an artist. And they were asked in the interview, would they ever reunite again? And she flatly said no. That was a period in time that cannot be recreated, and that would never happen, that the original trio would reunite. But
I'll ask both of you. My favorite Thompson Twins song of all time is actually from a movie in the 1980s, and it was bigger because of the movie than it was when it was on an album. I'll tell you the movie, see if you remember the song. The movie was 16 Candles.
I'm sure Dave will know.
Yep. So they ended with If You Were Here, which
There
was
you go.
not a single. It was on the Sidekicks album, which was their second album. And it's
Amazing.
a beautiful ending there where the two of them are on the table. Yes, yeah.
Great song.
Just
Perfect
a
way to end that
wonderful
movie.
song. Yes, yep.
We're talking with Dave Jurman. It's two guys and a mic. Dave, longtime record label exec, bunch of different labels. Worked with Mark when they were at Arista together, and then Columbia. And I had one other thing that you had sent in that I have to ask you about, because Steve Hackett was a part of my all-time favorite band, a band I've seen 19 times in concert.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
You know
a
who that
massive Genesis fan. And you got to work with Steve Hackett and Steve Howe, who was in another band I loved. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And the two of them were in GTR together, weren't they? Am I right?
Yep.
Yes.
Jim, I put that there specifically for you because I know you're a big Genesis fan. So, as Jim referenced, the group GTR. They were a group that was Steve Howe, Steve Hackett were the main leaders of the band. Max Macon was the lead vocalist, and they put out one album in 1986
and had a massive hit on it.
Called "When the Heart Rules the Mind" was the big track from that. Big rock radio song. And sadly, just that one album came out, and that was it. They did tour, but just had the one album, and then that was all she wrote. But I had set up a promotion at the time with Gibson Guitars, where we were going to have promotions across the country. Get it, Gibson Guitar, GTR, where we would give away Gibson guitars with various promotions across the country. And Gibson donated all the guitars and everything, but they just had one request. They said, listen, NAMM is coming up in Chicago. Is there a way, we're going to give you these thousands of guitars for free. Is there a way the guys could show up at the Gibson booth at NAMM in Chicago? So we said, yes, we'll get them there. They agreed to do it. But the problem was they were in rehearsal for their tour. So they had to do this like literally in a day. There's a place called Lidditz, Pennsylvania, and that's to this day a place where a lot of bands go to do it's set up. They got like a big airplane hangar there, and bands do the rehearsals for their tours in Lidditz, Pennsylvania, in the middle of nowhere, and that's where they were rehearsing for the tour. So the deal was we had to literally do it in a day. So their manager, Brian Howe, I believe his name was, and I flew up from New York. And I like to joke because we literally covered the entire spectrum of aviation in one day. We got on this plane out of LaGuardia that was literally like out of World War II with the propellers and the seats. This thing must have been like 40 years old. And we were like the only noisy, loud, the whole bit, That's the only plane that would go to Lidditz, Pennsylvania from LaGuardia or nearby, wherever we flew in or whatever. So we go out, we get to Lidditz in the morning to meet the guys. And then, again, because they only had a day, we had to hire a Learjet.
Wow.
And we took a Learjet from Lidditz right into Chicago. And what was incredible about this was, here it is. It's just the manager. I'm sitting there. There's Steve Howe on my right. There's Steve Hackett on my left. There's a flight attendant serving us fruit and cookies and everything. And I'm sitting next to two of the greatest rock guitar players of all time on a Learjet. I mean, how...
And that was quieter than the flight from LaGuardia.
I'm sorry?
It was quieter than the flight from LaGuardia.
Oh, that's why I say we literally covered the whole spectrum from like a bomber plane to like ultimate in luxury,
Nice.
in this Learjet. It's like a limo on air for those of you who have flown or whatever. But it was just so cool there. I was taking out photos of Steve. I saw you at Greensboro Coliseum in 1978 showing the photos and just hanging out like guys, it's like, but it's Steve Howe and Steve Hackett, two of the great guitar players of all time. We show up at NAMM, do that. And then the Learjet's taking them back to Lidditz because they got to get to rehearsals. And then I just board a conventional jet on whatever it was, United or American, back to LaGuardia that night. So I covered the whole spectrum. But it was just so cool just hanging out with those guys and being on there and spending time. And they were great guys, just really fantastic.
The whole thing is, and all I've read about them, and Peter Gabriel leaving and then eventually Hackett leaving, but they all remained pretty close friends, never had a massive breakup, that band. And I remember I mentioned it on the podcast before when Mark Goodman and I spent a whole afternoon with the whole band up in Toronto, Canada, when they were getting ready for that tour in 2007. And they, Mark flat out asked them, would you get, he's never had a bad breakup, would you do another album? And they were like, oh, we'd make the music for ourselves, but we have no interest in promoting anything anymore. We've done that, been there, no need to do it anymore.
It's true.
Interesting.
Interesting. But I wanted to
It's amazing how that band was able to, with the loss of Peter Gabriel, still continue on and do well, and even commercially, even do better than they had done when he was in the band. And then Gabriel, having his kind of success as well too, was a very unique situation, and not only have success, but just great quality music. A Trick of the Tail is maybe my favorite Genesis album.
My album too. That's my favorite album.
Really?
Yeah.
It's a wonderful album. Yeah.
And it's amazing that Phil Collins reluctantly stepped out of the drum kit to go sing. He didn't want to sing. He wanted to just be the drummer. And he turned out to be this incredible vocalist.
I think it turned out pretty good.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to jump in, Dave, we were both in the promotion department, and there were other
Mhm.
people in the promotion department. If I remember correctly, didn't Leslie Wunderman, Taylor Dayne meet up and have a relationship with someone in the promotion department? And didn't somebody from Expose marry somebody from the promotion department?
Look at Mark
Yes,
digging for the
yes.
dirt.
But apparently, you and I worked in the promotion department, and we had no hookups with any famous celebrities. Nothing.
Yep, yep, they certainly did. Taylor
This is what
ended up
bugs
having
Marks, by the way, Dave.
We
This
had
is what
nothing.
eats
I
at
had
him.
nobody. I mean, I was close to Billy Ocean, but that doesn't really count.
Right, right. Yes, Taylor ended up having as a boyfriend one of the people from the promotional staff, and Anne from the group ended up marrying the person who succeeded me in my position.
Exactly. Yeah.
They're no longer together, but
Exactly. He's got
married.
second-
So how wonderful is that? That was unintentional, but lo and behold,
Love
and
springs
I will
eternal in
say,
the promotion department.
and I will say, this person who did end up being the boyfriend of Taylor Dayne, he and I, the first time I was ever had my name on an album, Jermaine Stewart put our names on the album on the back cover, and that was a big thrill. The first time I ever had. Fortunately, I've been able to have that a bunch of times since then, but that was a real thrill for the first time seeing your name on the back of an album.
I have that. Mark, do you have one?
I'm sorry, do I have what?
Do you have an album credit?
Yeah, in fact, I had a Grammy shout out when Kenny G won his Grammy, so I got that going for me too.
I had my name appear on, I did the intro for a live Goo Goo Dolls album. Johnny Resnick is a good friend, and he and Robbie asked me to do the intro to the live version of the album. So I recorded it, and it ended up on the live album.
Wow.
It came out about 5-6 years ago, I think.
Boy, has the business changed, huh?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
It's all a little bit different now.
Let's get to the top 5 this week. I gave Dave
a
list, and I sat here and thought of different things we could do because I figured he could pretty much nail any one of them. But I came up with his top 5 favorite pop songs of all time, personally, not ones that necessarily he worked, just personally his top 5 pop songs. So you want to run them down, Dave?
Take it away, Dave.
So I kind of went back to the old school. I mean, it's really hard because there's so many new artists that I really like as well. There's so much great music out now, but I kind of went back to the records that kind of had such a huge influence on me, eventually getting into the music business, and just really made a mark on me on so many different ways growing up. So this was tough because it's almost like 1A, 1B, but number one is Penny Lane by the Beatles. The first ever album record I bought as a youngster was Magical Mystery Tour, and it kind of signaled a new era for the Beatles. They had Rubber Soul and Revolver, but then they were doing Sgt. Pepper, and Penny Lane was actually supposed to be on Sgt. Pepper, but Capitol demanded a single, and they decided to rush that out with Strawberry Fields Forever, so it never found its way onto that album. But it really was the beginning of the new era for the Beatles, the psychedelic era, and then ultimately what led to White Album and Abbey Road. So that song, just to this day, and the video, an incredible video as well too. I remember it being shown on American Bandstand, and it was kind of shocking to the people who had seen the clean mop tops, and all of a sudden they're watching this Penny Lane video with long hair and beards and things like that, and it kind of shocked them. And I thought that was really cool as well too. So that's number one.
I have to say, Dave, before you go on, I have to say it's hard to argue when you put the Beatles at number one anywhere. It really is.
Yes, exactly. No, absolutely. And many consider it the greatest single of all time because the B-side was Strawberry Fields Forever. So I'd have to put it number one for that too. And that song I love. But right behind it, another groundbreaking song for this band is Wouldn't It Be Nice? Arguably the greatest 2 minutes, whatever, recorded pop music as a single of all time, in my opinion. Again, you had the Beach Boys, If I Get Around, and all that kind of stuff, and California Girls. And then all of a sudden they come out with this song that's like, what is this? Totally different, and still stands the test of time. And of course, it leads off what many people consider one of the greatest albums of all time, Pet Sounds. So Wouldn't It Be Nice I have as number two. And I'll give you a little aside also, about these records, that on a personal note, I had the good fortune 10 years after it came out, when I was working at the campus radio station, to interview Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys. which was
Nice.
really cool. Yep, it was right when the Beach Boys had their quote comeback, when they had their remake of rock and roll music.
Hmm.
And after a long hiatus from having chart success, all of a sudden they were back on the charts and back playing arenas and everything. And interviewed Dennis in his hotel room at the Plaza Hotel, which was pretty cool. So that's number two. Number three, Marvin Gaye, "What's Going On?" Although it easily could be "Mercy, Mercy Me" as well too, another great song. But Marvin and that album, nothing needs to be said about it. Not only one of the greatest R&B albums of all time, but one of the greatest albums of all time. And I just get goosebumps every time hearing that song. Unfortunately, never saw Marvin Gaye in concert, but I did attend the NBA All-Star game in 1983, a year before he died, and saw Marvin sing the national anthem. And that was very controversial because he did kind of like a beatbox version of it. You can see it on YouTube, which kind of raised a lot of ruckus. The fact he didn't do it in a conventional fashion. So I did finally get a chance to see him at least there, but didn't see him in concert. But that would be number three. And what a he left us way, way too early. Number four is I love horn music. So one thread you'll see through the bands that I like over the years, I love bands with horns. Chicago, I'm a huge, huge Chicago fan. Particularly the first three albums are, landmark records. But Blood, Sweat, and Tears, "You've Made Me So Very Happy," which was a Brenda Holloway cover. It was on the Tamla Motown label. And David Clayton Thomas has just one of the great voices of all time. And you listen to that song and the changes and the nuances, you would never in a million years hear anything like that remotely on top 40 radio nowadays. But in those days, you would hear songs
Yeah.
like that. That became just a gigantic breakthrough hit for the band. And I still, to this day, when I hear it on the radio, it just gives me goosebumps. And then, arguably, in my opinion, one of the great vocal performances on record, number five, is "Born to Run" by Bruce Springsteen. I had a chance to see Bruce on that Born to Run tour when he came to Duke University Cameron Indoor Stadium. And that was fantastic. And obviously, although it didn't become a top 10 hit, it really crossed Bruce over, if you will, leading up to eventually having the big hit with "Hungry Heart," but really put him on the map. But what can we say about that whole album, let alone the single? And the drama of it, the production, everything of it just reeks of just greatness. And I have that at number five.
All right. You
It's a
can't
good top
argue with any
five.
of those choices. Great top
Yep.
five. Mark, you don't have to do five because we didn't discuss this beforehand, but do you have a favorite pop single of all time?
No, don't go into me. Let's talk more about Dave. Dave, before you go and we get cut off here, all the artists you work, and we always ask people this, maybe you can't name names, the best and maybe not the best. I mean, I've spoken about people I've had great relationships with, great artists, great people that did stuff, and some whose names we don't reveal all the time were not very good. And we've had other guests tell us some funny stories about artists that just, you never really want to meet the people that you really like. And if you do, it never turns out to be. And I think I mentioned on a couple of podcasts my experiences with Mr. Mellencamp, who I loved, and unfortunately didn't have a great experience with him. But overall, I gave him a pass on that because I was such a fan. So was there somebody you really enjoyed working with, or somebody you had hoped to work with, or somebody you hoped you never worked with again?
Well, it's hard because I was blessed. I mean, virtually everyone that I worked with was great. They were professional. They did everything you asked. I was working, obviously, with a lot of developing artists, so early parts of their careers and so forth, but had just great, great experiences. But it's hard. It's kind of like the grandfather, which is your favorite grandchild there,
Right.
So the artists I've talked about have been fantastic. But someone who I think about to this day who was so special I mentioned before, was Jermaine Stewart, who sadly passed away of an AIDS-related illness in the late 90s. But we kind of both came of age. I had just become a national promotion person at Arista at the time, and he was making his debut at Arista, and I kind of was able to make a name for myself with what I was doing with that project and everything, and he was a lot of fun to work with. So I have a very, very special place in my heart for him. as someone that would fit in what you're talking about, Mark. But that being said, I could name a whole bunch of other artists as well too, because they were all great to work with, both
Nice.
at Columbia and at Arista. On the flip side, I will tell you about an experience I had with an artist, which unfortunately kind of soured me to a certain degree. There was a hip hop artist named Slick Rick on the Def Jam label. He had a gigantic record called Children's Story in 1989 when I just joined Columbia. Massive, massive record. And I had a club promotion set up for him in Queens, out in Rego Park, where he was going to just show up to the club and sign autographs on a Memorial Day weekend. And I showed up at the product manager's apartment. She was going to come with me to pick up Rick, and we go to the club and everything. And I get there, and she says, "Bad news. Rick decided to go to LA early because he's got a promotion in a few days, and he's on the plane. Nothing we can do about it." Just totally blew off this thing. And here's a club out in Rego Park, packed. Must have been like 500 kids there, packed, waiting to meet Slick Rick. What are we going to do? And to add a little bit spice to it, in the 80s, some of these outer borough clubs were owned by people who, let's put it this way, had a little bit of a shady background. And this was one of those clubs, So the owner finds out that Slick Rick isn't going to be there. And now I'm getting nervous because I know about his background and the artist is going to be there. What am I going to do? So she calls up LL Cool J, who lives in Queens, and she knew them all by, their first names. So she's on the phone. "Hey, Todd, can you do me a favor?" It's his name, Todd Smith. "Can you just show up at this club in Queens, just sign some autographs?" And lo and behold, he does. He shows up that night, saves me. LL Cool J who's much bigger than Slick Rick, does the autographs, hangs out with all the people. We end up going up to breakfast at a diner, 4 o'clock in the morning, Queens. Couldn't have been nicer, and really saved the day for me. So I'd have to put the artist Slick Rick there. No aspersions. I wish him well, but that experience sadly soured me on him, and it was a very, very unfortunate night that was salvaged by someone who I tremendously admire to this day, LL Cool J.
LL Cool J is an amazing guy. He developed a station at Sirius XM called Rock the Bells Radio.
Yes.
And he is super involved with it. But not only that, he would come by and he would know the other stations, like the stations that I ran, and he would go, "Oh, I really like this," or he would fish for ideas, discuss ideas. He wasn't just locked into the hip hop world, which he is obviously huge in, but he had a lot of respect for country and pop and just everything. And he was just a fan of radio, and he was a fan of good radio. And when you would do artist collaboration stations, I always told Mark this, so people would always ask, especially in the early years, "Why don't you guys have a Beatles station? Why didn't you think about it?" Well, it's not that we didn't think about it. You got to work out details and money and all this other stuff. So, but when you have the artist be involved in the station, that makes it that much more special if they really take, a vested interest in making sure that the content is where it needs to be. If someone just cuts a few liners, well, you know what, the station's going to lose legs. You got to have now. So that's why like LL station and U2's radio works really well. And, the other bands that really put the effort into it. I developed when I was there, the Duran Duran Future Past radio, and I got access to the band for like 4 hours of getting content. So, you get a treasure trove of stuff to use, even though it's only going to be there a month or two. So, and LL's just one of those guys. I felt like, I got to throw that in there. He's an astute, not only artist, he's an actor, but he gets the whole end of the radio thing and really loves it.
So what did you say?
Hosted the Grammy Awards, the whole bit.
So what did you say? So we got good news and we got bad news. The bad news is there's no Slick Rick, but the good news is we've got LA Cool J in the house. Is that how you did it?
Yes. Yep. We said we were going to bring LL by or whatever. So people were very, very thrilled to see him. This club owner, all of a sudden, his anger subsided, and it worked out well. So thank you, LL Cool J.
That's really cool.
Well, Dave, we got to thank you for being a guest and being a big, huge supporter of ours. And we appreciate you coming on here. Fascinating stories. And it's really a pleasure for me to finally meet you. And I know you and Mark have known each other for a long time. But Dave Jurman, ladies and gentlemen, two guys and a mic,
Thank you,
our
Dave.
guest this
Thank you
week.
both. I really appreciate this. Has been a ball. Thank you so much.
And you're going to be the last episode for a couple of weeks because I have to go on I'm going to Thailand for almost 3 weeks, so we're not going to have a couple episodes for a while. Mark doesn't want to fly solo, so
No, you see, I'll just sit here and talk to myself and pretend that I'm having my conversations. But hey, I mean, Dave, you've been in good company. We've had Rick Springfield the last week or so, and we had our buddy Ken Lane from Arista last week. So it's been a good couple of weeks.
Yes, and my former colleague Lee Leipzner, I thoroughly enjoyed the
He was
interview with
great.
him,
Yeah, we had
and
him.
Patty Riscona, who I've known for many,
funny
many
guy.
years. The interviews have been outstanding, both with artists and industry people, and I wish you both all the best. with
Another friend of
continued
mine said to
episodes.
say hello to you, Dave. Rob Morris.
Oh, wonderful!
Yeah, Rob and I
Please
are.
send my regards.
He lives right near me, and we play golf almost weekly.
Oh, wow, terrific!
I said, tell Dave I said hello.
Oh, please send my regards.
I will. Dave Jurman on Two Guys and a Mic. Please like, subscribe, comment, and we appreciate you being here following us on YouTube.